Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Blue is the New White podcast. That's my best radio voice right there. Listen, today's guest is someone I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the past few months, an extraordinary wealth of knowledge and an incredible thought leader in this industry. Gyner Ozgul is the Senior VP of Operations for Smart Care Equipment Solutions. Gyner grew up in the restaurant industry, working for Burger King for 11 years, starting at the age of 16. He moved up in the ranks for the franchisee over the years, while also putting himself through school. Eventually, his journey led him to the other side of the aisle, becoming service manager for GCS. After GCS transitioned to Smart Care, Gyner spent time in many areas of the company, including service, parts, and eventually operations. Listen in to hear incredible insights from one of the industry's brightest minds as we talk all about leadership, the rewards of blue-collar work, recruiting, training, and retaining technicians, and the human element behind the service industry. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and on our website, blueisthenewwhite.com, to receive all the latest updates. As always, this show's not monetized and we don't run ads. We rely strictly on word of mouth from our listeners to further the mission. So if you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to rate it, review it, and share it. The future generations of tradespeople depend on it. They depend on you. So thank you again and enjoy this episode of the Blue is the New White podcast with Gyner Ozgul. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Blue is the New White podcast. I have a special guest today, Mr. Gyner Ozgul. Gyner, welcome to the show, finally.
Josh, thanks for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
Finally, you can say it. You can say it. No, I really do appreciate you coming on. I think that this is going to be a great episode. Listeners are really going to get a lot out of it. So why don't we start with you and your background, your story. Tell me who you are, where you come from, and how you got to where you are today.
Oh, wow. So I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of it. I've been in restaurants my whole life, so I'll just start with that. You know, one of the things I keep on the desktop of my computer is a little picture of my dad, myself, and a cousin of mine. And my dad emigrated to the U.S. in the early 70s, and he worked as a short order cook for the first half of his career in various kind of diners in Chicago. And so I got some time as a young kid to spend in restaurants, and his twist to me was always, I don't want you doing the same thing I'm doing. So fast forward a few years, I was a teenager, I needed a job. And so there was a Burger King restaurant a few blocks from my house. I was like, well, I need money. I'm not going to do this for my whole life. You're the teenage dream of going to college and doing something big with your life. And so I started there at 16. I left there, I think I was about 27. Started as an hourly employee, left as a regional director of operations for a franchisee there in Chicago. Spent a lot of time in restaurants, really appreciate what people do in restaurants, understand the kitchen. I feel really at home when I'm in kitchens just because I'm an operator and I have an eye for looking at how things are working. So I came here. At the time, Smart Care was called a different business, GCS. It was owned by a company called Ecolab back in 2003. I started out as a service manager, very naive to the repair industry. How's that? And I had a great boss. He's still a good friend of mine, George Kennedy, who is from the industry. And George gave me the keys to the branch and the list of contracts and customers and said, here you go. I'm going to, work on projects now for the company. And I'm like, oh, great. So, I didn't know what I knew about restaurants is I knew the kitchen and I felt comfortable there. So for me, learning the business was a simple experience. I just went and spent time with our technicians. I felt good about that. I installed fry pots and hung evaporators. I was talking to somebody about this. One of the funniest stories I have was being in a pancake house holding a griddle top for a technician who was installing the thermostats underneath it. And him and I just laughing the whole time because we were just getting soaked in grease because they had never really cleaned this thing. So that's how I learned. I just went out there. And then, on the customer side, the way I learned the operations, I give the story of, one of the first preventative or planned maintenance contracts I sold. I went around with a customer and I asked him for a paper menu. He didn't know why, but I just said, "Can you give me one?" He said, "Sure." So he gives it to me. And as he's walking around, I'm making notes on the paper menu. And I learned the business by understanding his needs via the menu as a proxy. So when we were done and we sat down, I knew what was most important to him from an equipment standpoint based on how he was articulating what they sold the most of on the menu. And kind of resonating that value to a customer was something I needed to teach myself. So anyways, that was how I started as a service manager. Did a lot of different roles in the organization within when Ecolab owned GCS. Spent a little bit of time in project management. Ran our supply chain and parts team for a number of years. I was a parts guy. I always laugh about that. Went from a service guy to a parts guy. So I crossed enemy lines in the business. And got pulled back into the service about 2017. Ecolab made the decision that they were going to sell off the GCS business after owning it for about 2 decades. So we became an independent company back in November of 2017 called Smart Care Equipment Solutions, where I am now. I currently am the Senior Vice President of Operations. I oversee field service is the biggest area of oversight for me. Our IT or technology team is kind of the second area. All of our customer service and dispatch functions, as well as what I call the support function. So parts, safety, and fleet kind of are in that support area. So anything that's really difficult is under the umbrella of what my team has to accomplish each and every
Gyner
day.
will handle it.
And I say that with a smile. It's fun. I never go home or never leave the job and say, I didn't accomplish anything every day. I have an objective to feel good. And, I have a very small objective every day that I make sure that I talk to at least one employee a number of levels down in our organization. I just pick them at random. Sometimes it's just on my email. I'll see a copy of a person's random name and I'll just call them. I try to do that via email or phone call every single day. It just helps me stay grounded in who I am and my role in the organization.
Yeah, well, and I think that's important. That's a very, very interesting backstory. I got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
So first off, before I get to my questions, we were talking about this before the show. I got to ask you, what is the origin of your name?
So the name is interesting. So in Turkish, it's said Gyner, and the U has an umlaut. So it's common to Turkish, and some of the Scandinavian listeners might understand the U with the umlaut of it. So the Y after the G ended up because my mother, who's not Turkish, was in the hospital when I was born. And by the time my dad got to the hospital, she had already filled out the birth certificate and spelled it wrong. And for my dad at the time, again, he was a short-order cook. He didn't make a lot of money. I think he said at the time it was a couple $100s to go get it all corrected. And he's like, "I'm just leaving it." So Gyner, that's why it's the only, you Google it, there's only one that's going to show up. And that's me. And it's based on a misspelling. How's that?
That is so fantastic. That's great. I think my listeners are going to get a kick out of that. What a blessing, right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
unique and completely by accident.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Okay. All right. So I had to ask about that before we move on. But a couple of questions I had. So you said you were working at Burger King between the ages of 16 and 27. Mm-hmm. So I have to ask about your college career. Did you do that alongside Burger King? Did you wait to go to college? How did that work out?
Yeah, I was 2 of the years in there early on, I was a swing manager or an hourly manager, better said. And so what I did is I happened to work in a restaurant that was a 24-hour restaurant for a number of years. So I worked graveyard for almost 3 years while I was going to school. So I would work from 10 to 7, so 10 at night to 7 in the morning, 5 days a week. Would get up and go to school during the day. And college is a little different than high school and stuff, right? It's kind of variable scheduling. Mm-hmm. So I would try to configure my schedule the best I can so that I could, work and stay alive. So I wouldn't I wouldn't be up for 20-hour days, but I did have a bunch of 20-hour days in there. But yeah, I put myself through school while I was still working full time. So I did school full time and worked full time early in my career. I did take a 5-year hiatus from school after I graduated and got my bachelor's degree before I went back and got my master's. I don't talk about the two all that much. Look, it's been great from a beneficial standpoint of how I run a business and understand the context of the mechanics of things like accounting and marketing and the functional departments. I would say life experience has been very valuable to me, and I lean on that much heavier than I do my educational. I'm not discounting that. I want to be very clear.
Of course.
It's just where I feel most comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my listeners especially will understand where you're coming from there. And that's very interesting and impressive too, by the way, being able to work that job, the graveyard shift and go to school. What did you go to school for, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, so I was an undergrad English student. So I have a bachelor's in liberal arts with a minor in management, business management. And, it's funny. The English story was, I went to my first year and a half of college in a state university. I got a little disenchanted. You sit in these big, halls of 500 people during a professor talking about a subject matter. And I was not into it. It didn't feel resonating to me. I didn't feel that kind of connection. So about almost 2 years in, before the start of my second year, I went to a smaller college, a smaller Catholic college, I think, out of Romeoville, Illinois. And I went there and I just met with a professor, and he asked me to sit in and audit his class. And it was a just totally different experience for me, smaller, very tight, very family feeling. And so I ended up doing that. And, it got me back on track. And, the liberal arts piece of it has helped me with how I speak. I probably write better than I talk. The Chicagoan in me shows at times, but I definitely appreciate how it totally helped me understand this whole idea of learning through reading, and I appreciate that, and I still do that today.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, and I'm a big advocate too for. People don't think I am, but I am actually an advocate for college and higher education, so long as you can achieve an ROI from it.
Yes.
And to your point, you said you utilize a lot of what you learned today, because of your experience in school. So I think that's a perfect example of how to achieve an ROI and how to actually put it to use, because there's just too many people out there that go to college just to go to college, and then they don't end up using anything. And I often hear, look, it was valuable because of the network that I built, or, the friends that I made, stuff like that. But, there's some people out there that, just don't feel like they achieved that ROI that they went to college for.
Yeah. The way I view that, Josh, is, you have to have the fire of entrepreneurship in you first. And then, college has to be the accelerant or the gasoline you pour on it.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
And to me, I was already kind of into my career at Burger King at the time, and here as well, by the way, when I was working on my master's the second go around, I was already in Lean Six Sigma at Ecolab as a black belt project manager way before I was going back for my master's degree. Right. I just said to myself, I think going back might help me here and teaching me more skills. Not necessarily, hey, I should just go back because I think I need a master's degree as a kind of a badge mark on my shirt. Yeah. It wasn't my reasoning. And to your point, and to further that, you have to have the right inspiration for why you go. You can't make college, I joke around about career politicians. The same problem, right? You can't go to college with the expectation you'll be successful. Some people are very fortunate to do so. I do say that. You have to go to college with the intent of saying, what am I passionate about, and how can that help me drive that passion?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's, you don't go for the badge of honor, you go for the education. And, right. If you want to make use of that, you have to know how you're going to use it.
Yeah.
and or at least what you're going to use it for. There's a lot of variables there, but all very, very good points. So then from 16 to 27, you worked at Burger King,
Yep.
and then after that, you became a service manager for GCS. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
That is correct.
So in your years at Burger King, if you could pick one takeaway, like one valuable life lesson out of there, what would that be? I know there's probably like a billion, but pick one. Not that that's hard or anything.
I had an HR person early on in my career. I must have been probably 19 or 20, a very young manager at the time. And I think her name was Kim. And she said something to me that sticks with me until today, which is never lose the sight of the fact that the people you work with are people. They have lives, they have families, they have loved ones, and you're seeing a snapshot of who they are when you're working with them. And that is really important to me. And I think about that every single time I make decisions. It doesn't hold me up. It's just, it's one thing to talk to people about their performance at work. There's an easy line to cross over in terms of how you speak to people in terms of who they are and as a person. And that's a line I'm very careful to not cross, because, we have to be able to keep them feeling good as a person while making sure that we feel good about how our business is running. So that always is kind of running around in the back of my head.
It's a good lesson. I'm glad I asked. No, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that's incredibly important. I think very much in our industry as well, in particular, because we got technicians, I mean, sometimes we only see them, I mean, gosh, once a month, depending on the size of your business and your position in the business. I mean, depending on how often they're in and out of the office, the warehouse, the parts, the parts area or whatever, these guys are and girls, are spread out all over the place. And, so it's hard to keep that connection, and really look at them as, the people that they are within the organization and within themselves. So, very, very good advice.
Yes. Thanks.
I'm learning a lot.
Not
Gyner.
mine. I took it from somebody, but I use it.
It's still good advice, no matter where it came from. Okay, cool. So once you became the service manager for GCS, what was your biggest struggle entering into that role?
Learning how to talk to customers differently, right? So I was jumping the counter, I like to say, because I was the customer and now I became the supplier of the customer. And this whole expectation that, I need you here 2 hours ago was very new for me, right? It's like, wow, okay, now I understand when I would call my suppliers and say, why aren't you here? Because I can't make fries. Now I'm the one being told, why aren't you here? Why I can't make fries? And, that whole messaging piece is really complicated because the empathy you need to show customers and substantiate it with an actual solution to go deliver the service that they're looking for is very complex, because everybody has a different expectation and every customer feels that they're the number one customer in your portfolio. Mm-hmm. And I had the unique challenge of trying to learn how I can make them all feel like number ones, right? Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, this whole complex management of technicians and their competencies and their personalities and their availabilities, all that kind of plays into how you're going to message back to a customer. So it was very interesting learning how to do that. And what I found is building rapport and relationships with those customers is as important as the good service you provide them. Actually, with certain customers, it became more important that I had a great relationship than the service itself was. Not anything against the service. I still had to give them good service. But you found that the relationship actually worked in your benefit when you're in the middle of a snowstorm in downtown Chicago and the guy's going to take an extra 3 hours to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. And you said something there that stuck out with me, or stuck out to me rather, but you hear a lot, this word being thrown around a lot today, empathy, right? And it's important. It's absolutely important, to be able to empathize with employees and with customers and, just with everybody. It's good for our EQ. It's good for, the relationship and everything. But you said something here too. It's the empathy plus the solution for the customers, because you're absolutely right? You can be as empathetic as they come, but if you don't provide that solution that they're looking for, that only gets you halfway there.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, you can only use empathy so far if you don't deliver.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But delivery isn't good without empathy either, because it doesn't allow you a chance to merchandise your value back to the customer. So you got to make sure that both of those are kind of coupled together as you think about talking to customers.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So talk to me about how this talking to one employee many levels down from you, how it grounds you. You said that it grounds you, but as we're on the topic of empathy, and stuff like that, I think that's a good segue into this question.
Mm-hmm. Well, it grounds me because it reminds me of where, and this is going to sound cliche, everybody says this, it reminds you of where you came from, but it really does remind me of where I came from, right? I started as an hourly employee, I had bad managers that I worked for. I worked for bad VPs at certain points in time in my career. And it helps kind of just ground you in, I was having a discussion. Let me give you a real practical example. I was working with our IT team on a certain part of our new ERP implementation. And there's this functionality we've been trying to get through that we're finding out it's going to be a lot tougher to get through. It's not a no, it's going to take a little longer than we expected. With my conversation with one of my IT leaders, I said, what we need to do is get on the phone with, this group of people, in this case, dispatchers in our organization, and find out what's meaningful to them that we could go change quickly that would make a significant step change in their jobs, make it easier for them, make it better for them, open up time for them to go call an extra customer, call an extra technician. How do I provide that value back to them and help them feel good about it? So that's the whole grounding myself in. It's one thing, we as business leaders, a lot of times we get caught up in the how do I drive the better P&L. It could be revenue or profit, by the way, when I say that. But sometimes we lose sight of the fact that part of the enablers of both of those things is grounding yourself in the people on your teams and how you can help them do their jobs better.
Yeah. Going back to that advice that I found so much value in, right? People are people.
Yeah. People are people.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like very, very good practice. And if anybody out there is listening, that's some advice you probably want to heed. So, all right, cool. No, I was just curious about that. So moving on a little bit then. So how long have you been in the role of Senior VP of Operations?
I think I'm pushing 4 years now. I think I'm coming up on my 4th year in this job.
What's your biggest challenge?
Hiring technicians.
There it is. Okay.
It was before COVID, and it still is. I don't think that's changed all that much.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What's so hard about finding technicians?
So I like to think about it. So let's talk about kind of aggregate or like maybe more industry trends. And what I'd say is, if you think about tailwinds in the industry, the end users are the places that we go eat at. The kitchens have a couple of dynamics at play. One, they're getting smaller. The footprints of kitchens have been getting smaller for a number of years now, probably for the last 10 or so years. So as you look at restaurants, they are pushing that kitchen size smaller. So what does that mean? That means there's less redundancy in those kitchens than times past. Where somebody had 3 fryers, they may have 2, or maybe they only have 1, right? And that puts more pressure on the service agent to go deliver good service. The second issue is the complexity, the operational complexity, because they're trying to drive this sense of menu proliferation. That's what our CEO, Bill Emery, calls it, menu proliferation. In other words, like, Starbucks is selling breakfast sandwiches and not just coffee, right? So what comes with that is more complex pieces of equipment that do more things for that customer. So, one of our operating groups, our speeding oven group or turbo technicians, works very successfully on turbo chef ovens, right? Which at face value, when you're looking at them from the outside as a customer just, over the counter at a Subway, you don't think, oh, that's just a glorified microwave. You ask one of our technicians, they're like, oh gosh, the wiring is more complex, the readouts are more complex, the diagnosis is more complex. So then, that menu proliferation gives you more complex equipment, right? And then you have like just the competitive environment itself of our end user customers, right? They're all trying to get the same business now. So so wrap that all around, the competency of the technician is getting more and more elevated, right? So the mechanical diagnosis skills of when I started here 18 years ago and where we are today, I would say, if a technician was here in his diagnosis skills 18 years ago, he has to be here now to be very successful. And the reason is those cuts I told you, customers' expectation of getting better service delivery, being good at the diagnosis skills, the more complex equipment that I have less of, is a challenge, right? So if I'm a technician now, what's my incentive to get into this industry? And that's what causes, me to lose sleep at night, I guess, to some extent. Like, how am I going to find technicians fast enough to meet that customer need and that growing complexity around that customer need?
Oh yeah, and it's not just that too. It's the businesses itself, right? Like it's Smart Care, it's Windy City, it's how we're growing and how we keep up with the growth is bringing on competent technicians. And this goes back to something that I say a lot in the blue is the new white world, is that people just don't understand how intelligent, these technicians are.
Yes.
And the perceptions that exist around what it means to be a tech. If anyone out there even knows what a food equipment technician is, it's unbelievable. I mean, some of the smartest people that I know are here in this building, and because, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about if you've ever worked on a turbo chef.
Yep.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. The way, look, our technicians, I say this in extremes, but it's true, right? They can build houses, right? They choose this career path of kitchen equipment repair or HVAC repair, depending on the scope within your business, right? But they have a lot of different avenues. A lot of them are great carpenters. A lot of them are great mechanics on things like automobiles. A lot of them have great hobbies of, restoring a lot of old types of equipment. They're highly skilled, and yet they're passionate about staying in this industry. And I think there's something lost there that people outside the industry don't understand. And look, if you think about it, we have, I always say this really simply, right? We have hundreds of manufacturers in this industry that represent thousands of models of pieces of equipment that represents hundreds of thousands of parts, right? And when you do that little waterfall in your head, the fact that our technician can repair that wide a range of equipment every single day and do it, depending on who your company is, 60 to 80% of the time on the first try is remarkable, is absolutely remarkable. It undervalues how important our technicians are in this industry.
Yeah.
And, I think at its core, what people lose sight of is we're not an industry that just fixes equipment. We're an industry that feeds people in America every single day. Hundreds of millions of people eat because of the work our technicians do in hospitals, in restaurants, in universities, in food retail. I mean, no one thinks of it that way, but our technicians were in the hospitals and the grocery stores making sure those rotisserie chickens and those meals could happen in the last year during the pandemic, with their masks on and putting their livelihoods at stake. So, I have a tremendous amount of respect for them because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's just, that's such good information, and what a great way to describe it. A couple of things that you said, hundreds of manufacturers, thousands of models, hundreds of thousands of parts. So if anybody out there has customers that are complaining about the bill, just repeat that, right?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
That speaks volumes. And you know, the other thing that you said, you know, we don't fix equipment, we feed people, I think is incredibly important. It's the shift in mindset and how you look at it. So I know we're kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but
It's fine.
back to the rabbit holes are where the gold nuggets live.
Yep.
So back to the challenges of hiring technicians. Have you seen a difference before and after COVID?
No, I thought we would. I
Me too.
went before COVID, it was very challenging, right? It's challenging on two cuts before COVID. One, finding kitchen repair technicians is challenging enough because otherwise you're just poaching from, we're poaching from each other,
right,
or within the industry, which I'm just not akin to. I've never liked that. I just think there's something wrong about that, and we're not solving the right problem, which is how do we attract talent? And then, the second problem was, the younger talent wasn't coming into the industry. So we had kind of a front end problem of attracting new talent into the industry. And look, there's macro level dynamics of age of workforce happening and, proliferation of facilities management, where a guy in California can go work at, Facebook and, be a static technician on site versus coming to work for you or I and drive around all day and fix a lot of different pieces of equipment, right? So there's a lot of those things kind of happening. I thought during the pandemic, I think myself and a number of operators I spoke to out there thought because of the business decline, we'd see a number of technicians kind of in the marketplace, not only from our industry, but from, let's just say, adjacent industries as well, right? Whether that be auto mechanics industries or other repair industries, HVAC, maybe residential repair. And it just hasn't happened. It hasn't materialized.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure why. I'm sure technicians who are going to listen to this podcast say, I know why. And it would be great if they could comment to us and give us some sense of that.
That would be wonderful if you're listening.
If you're listening, to give us a little understanding of that. But no, we have not seen it. So we have the same problem we did before and after. And the concern after is, whereas before our growth was a little more controlled, right? You knew what you're selling and you knew how many technicians you're going to bring on board. I think as we go into the back half of 2021 and early 2022, the challenge we're all going to have as operators in this industry is the business is going to come back faster than we can bring on technicians. And that's real for us, for all of us. That step change is very significant. I always ground people in practicalities, right? You bring on one, we have the Excel Energy Center here in downtown St. Paul. If I bring on Excel Energy Center as a piece of business in the next couple of months, that's one technician. Just, on an annualized basis, okay? But that's one technician for me, the number of those service calls. Well, how many Excels am I going to pick up across the country? In the back half of this year.
Yeah.
It's a thought that's very, it's a very sobering thought.
It is. It absolutely is. And you're absolutely right. It's a double-edged sword, right? Because we want to bring on more business. We want to grow. We want to do these things. And one of our biggest challenges is being able to facilitate that through the people we're bringing on, within the organization. So it's very real. It's very sobering, as you put it. So what's the solution? Now, two-part question here, because I want to address one thing that you said, which is, we don't want to go around poaching each other's technicians because that's not solving the problem, right? That's recycling the talent in the industry, and it's not adding any new talent to the industry. So therefore, it's not growing the pool of the technicians. It's just sharing it, in not so nice of a way. But so as far as that goes, how do we fix that? How do we recruit new talent? Yeah.
So a couple things on that. I think of the same way you do, is how do we recruit new talent and then how do we keep them, right? And on the recruiting side, if technology isn't part of your playbook in this industry, and when I say technology, we all have one of these things, right? One of these fancy phones in our pockets. And, we live in a world where technology is what drives people to be passionate about something. And in our case, this industry, and I'll talk a little bit on the retention side of the technology, why it's important, but you have to make a play and an appeal to the generations we want to bring in that technology is part of your platform. And if you're not, and all your focus is on is, hey, it's glorious to come fix fryers, you're not going to attract the talent. So that has to be part of it. The second piece of that is, how are you driving your culture in your organization to help them feel good about the person, right? Remember, that was kind of one of my tenets, my personal tenets.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you make them feel good about what they do every day is really important. And then third is this whole idea of, we don't fix equipment, we feed people. What is your story as an organization? And does it resonate with the person you're trying to hire? In this case, technicians. And you have to give them a reason, a compelling reason to believe that they can make a difference in society. And just telling them they're going to fix fryers is not a compelling reason. Telling them that the cook chill system they're going to fix in the hospital system that's going to feed 500 patients that are sick is a compelling reason to bring someone in the industry. Those are two very different approaches with a very similar message, right? So you have to be able to help them understand the impact of what they're going to do. So technology, culture, and have them resonate with whatever your mission is for your organization, and deliver something that's bigger than just fixing the equipment.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's something I talk a lot about in the book and the podcast is the generations that are coming into the workforce now. They are very big on community, culture, making a difference, changing the world. And to me, of course, I'm a little biased because I'm in the skilled trades, and I think the same way you do on a lot of things. But to me, the skilled trades is one of the best opportunities to do that because of the things that you influence, but you have to have that specific mindset, what you're talking about, in order to project that to people. Because face value on the surface, they may not see it. They see fixing fryers, unless it's explained to them, hey, no, you're feeding people. Hey, no, you're actually contributing to saving lives, over here in the hospitals. And no matter what it is that you're doing, whether you're a food equipment technician, HVAC tech, refrigeration tech, construction, carpentry, you name it.
Because people can resonate with the humanity of everything that we do.
Mm-hmm.
They can't resonate with the business. They can resonate with the humanity. And that's why it's important. And for me, like the second part of this, this parlays into the retention part, Josh, which is, okay, now that I got them working for me, how do I keep them and make them feel good about being here? The first one is, what is their confidence in doing the repairs, right? And what are you doing to help them? So remember that technology comment I made about these phones? It's really important that you start to think about, how are we going to level set the competencies of our technicians across the board? And it's not an easy solution, by the way. And technology and data can help enable that going forward, in terms of, how do I get the tech who's been here for 20 years and the tech who's been here for 2 years to have the same access to the same resources to complete the repair equally the same for our customer? Now, some of the listeners may say that's impossible. And today it might very well be, but thinking about things like, in our business, we're starting to think about a learning management system. So how do we take all the Cephesa testing we do in the industry, all the OEM testing we do in the industry, all the competencies our technicians build? We're using certain tools like Help Lightning, which is kind of a remote merge reality tool. How do we upload that to kind of one data area and give that access to all technicians in the field, right? Think of it as a Google search internally for the industry, where a technician who's making a repair now has access to the same knowledge that the technician for 20 years has in his little clip notebook that he has in his pocket, right? How do we take that pocket and give access to all the technicians across the board? It seems very aspirational, but at some point we have to start. And doing that also attracts new talent, because that confidence that you give them, that I can start working for you, and within a number of months I can go fix a repair and stand in front of a customer and feel confident that I have access to the tools to diagnose and and complete a successful repair, bringing this full circle makes me want to stay here because that feels like they have support. You're giving me confidence, you're giving me support, and you're giving me access to training to keep me successful in the job that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, and it's going to become especially important moving forward. There's a couple of pieces to that. I think this is kind of my second part to the last question I asked you. On how do we recruit and how do we get more people into the industry? But it's kind of what I'm wondering is, we're growing fast. You mentioned you threw out that scenario where you bring on one customer, right? And you need one new tech dedicated to that customer. When you're talking about bringing new talent in, and this kind of ties in with this training and learning management system piece, it's going to take time to train them. It's going to get time to get them to be road ready, as you'd say, and, being able to eventually take on that account. So, how do you balance that? How do you mitigate the time that it takes to train somebody to be as competent as you need them to be from a technical standpoint, while still being able to facilitate that growth?
Yeah. You have to give them the tools, and you have to, when we hire new technicians, we do baseline assessments for all our new hires, Josh, because we really want to understand. It's not necessarily for us to be critical of their competencies. It's to understand where they'll need help, right? And then it's how do we create a path for them to get more quickly filled in those gaps that we identify in that assessment, that initial assessment. So that's kind of speaking directly to your point. And today, pre-COVID, it was nice because you had classes and you could send trainers out and do ride-alongs. Mm-hmm. Today, it's a lot of, we're building online training tools and online training classes. We're building curriculums that we're going to be using through LMS systems, and we're doing virtual kind of ride-alongs with our trainers and our technicians in order to give them that support to kind of minimize that kind of skill gap that they're going to have on day one that you identified.
Yeah, that makes sense. So are you seeing, because of the changes in training, are you seeing it taking a little bit more time these days to train new technicians than compared to pre-COVID?
Yeah, I don't have the data on that yet. Just because I gave my training manager a very big goal of moving half of our training to digital this year. He looked at me like I was crazy. He probably thinks so if he listens to this. But no, I mean, the jury's out a little bit on that. But I'd say is, I think it might take us a little longer. Although what I'd say is there's a little bit of a canceling effect there, right? It's flying somebody somewhere, putting them up in the hotel, taking them away from their family, all that time. That's what I'd say non-value add to their training. I'm adding back by having a little more time on the training itself, right? Fair point. So I think there's a little canceling effect there for us. That's a theory. If you and I talk in like 6 to 8 months, we could check in on that very question again, and I might have a little more information for you.
Yeah. Well, and there's the other thing too, right? Which is the generational differences. The previous generations didn't learn as well, online as the newer generations do. Right. And so it's almost this last generation has adapted to that style of learning. That's how they've been learning for a very long time. So depending on the age group that you're bringing in and training, that could have a big effect too.
Right.
Yeah. Very, very interesting stuff. I can't believe we've already almost been talking for an hour.
Yes.
So. All right. Well, then we're gonna move to close here. But I have a question that I like to ask everybody that comes on the show.
Sure.
And if you've listened to a couple episodes, you probably know what's coming. But look, I talk a lot about success. I've been blessed to live my definition of success through the trades. I know a lot of other people who have too. Almost everybody I talk to on this show, which is just fantastic. So, I like to ask how it is that you define success, Gyner, not necessarily personally or professionally, just overall, what does success look like to you? And how are you achieving that with what you're doing today?
Success for me is, do the people around me advance in a manner that makes them feel good about themselves? That was kind of a second lesson I learned early in my Burger King career. My success is really an output of the success of the people around me. And I have seen a number of my, people I've worked with or worked with me or for, whatever terminology you want to use, advance their careers in and outside of smart care. And that for me feels successful. That means I've had an impact to whatever degree, small or large, for an individual that helps them advance their career. I have a former customer service center manager of mine who, I'll keep his name off of here to protect the innocent, because I don't know if he'd want me to say his name. He left our organization to go work as director of technical training for a medical devices service company, actually, so another service company. And he's done really well in the last year and a half. And he texted me out of the blue the other day and said, the time that he spent with me was very influential on, he feels, on his career today. I don't know the details behind that statement, but that to me feels very successful for me. There's always the business aspect and the personal aspect to your points, but that makes me feel much better about who I am as a person and how I influence people.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And that's, at the end of the day, what really matters, right? Because that's what drives our happiness. That's what drives, who we are and really defines us. So, no, I think that's a fantastic answer, Gyner. But I want to thank you for coming on the show. But before we go, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Oh, so I am Gyner Ozgul, G-Y, like Y like yellow, misspelled. And like Nancy, E-R, Ozgul, O-Z-G-U-L on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me. My LinkedIn's pretty open, so send me messages. My email is actually on my LinkedIn profile, so I don't hide it. Feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions or want to talk further. Otherwise, you can go to our smartcaresolutions.com website, and you'll see me on there under our team. My email address is there as well, so I'm as public as you get. So there isn't a lot I'd like to hide from. So feel free to contact me directly if anybody wants to talk further.
Awesome. Well, Gyner, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time.
Josh, thanks for having me.
All right. Take care, buddy.